There comes a moment in every human connection when words stop working, when explaining, chasing, proving, and persuading only push the heart further away. And in that moment, life is inviting you into a higher level of power, not the power of control, but the power of presence. Because here's the truth most people never understand. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is energy. Silence is certainty. Silence is the loudest declaration of self-worth you will ever make. An avoidant does not fear love. They fear losing themselves. They fear pressure. They fear emotional invasion. And the more you chase, the more you confirm their deepest belief, that love means suffocation. But when you choose silence, not from manipulation, not from punishment, but from grounded self-respect, you change the entire emotional equation. You stop saying, choose me, and you start saying without words, I choose myself. And that is magnetic. Silence removes the noise that allowed them to stay disconnected. It removes the reassurance that you'll always be there no matter how little they invest. And suddenly, for the first time, they are left alone with their own emotions. And that's when something extraordinary happens. Their nervous system begins to settle. Their mind begins to wander. And their heart begins to ask questions it has avoided for a lifetime. Why do I miss them? Why does the space feel heavy? Why does their absence feel louder than their presence ever did? You see, avoidant individuals fall in love not through pursuit, but through realization, not through pressure, but through freedom. When silence gives them space to choose, love has a chance to rise naturally. But here's the deeper lesson. This isn't about making someone fall in love with you. This is about who you become in the silence. Because when you stop chasing, you start building. When you stop explaining, you start embodying. When you stop begging for connection, you start living in alignment with your highest values. And that alignment, that's divine. When your energy says, I am whole, I am grounded, I am fulfilled with or without you, something shifts at a spiritual level. Love stops being a transaction and becomes a choice. And if they come back, they don't come back because they need you. They come back because they want you. And if they don't, you've still won because you didn't abandon yourself trying to be chosen. Remember this, silence is not weakness. Silence is mastery. Silence is the space where love either rises to meet you or reveals it was never aligned. And when you live from that truth, you don't just attract love, you become it. When silence shifts the power dynamic, it is not about taking power from someone else. It is about reclaiming it within yourself. Most people misunderstand power in relationships. They believe power comes from being desired, chosen, or needed. But true power comes from self-regulation, self-respect, and emotional sovereignty. The moment you stop reaching outward for validation, you stop handing your power away. Silence becomes the signal that you are no longer operating from fear of loss, but from confidence in your own worth. In dynamics with avoidant individuals, pursuit creates imbalance. The one who explains more, reassures more, and reaches more becomes energetically smaller, while the one who withdraws becomes larger. This is not because the avoidant is stronger. It is because they are reacting to pressure by protecting their autonomy. When you continue to talk, text, and emotionally lean in while they lean back, you reinforce their belief that distance equals safety. Silence interrupts that pattern instantly. It removes the pressure that fuels avoidance and restores equilibrium. Silence also removes emotional predictability. When someone knows you will always be there, always respond, always pursue, they never have to emotionally engage. There is no urgency, no reflection, no risk. But when you step into silence with intention, you remove the emotional safety net they unconsciously relied on. Suddenly, they are no longer responding to you. You are responding to yourself. That shift forces them to feel what they were avoiding, uncertainty. And uncertainty is where awareness begins. Power shifts internally first. Instead of monitoring their behavior, their texts, their moods, you begin to return your attention to your own nervous system. You regulate yourself rather than trying to regulate the relationship. Silence gives you space to breathe, to feel grounded, to reconnect with your values and standards. You stop acting from anxiety and start acting from alignment. And alignment is powerful because it does not seek permission. This is why silence feels unsettling to an avoidant, not because it is manipulative, but because it removes the illusion of control. They are no longer the ones setting the emotional temperature. They can no longer retreat knowing you will chase. Silence communicates, without aggression or blame, that you will not abandon yourself to keep someone comfortable. That message lands deeply, even if they never consciously articulate it. There is also an energetic recalibration that occurs. When you speak less, you feel more. When you stop explaining, you start observing. You begin to notice where you compromised your needs, where you overextended, where you mistook effort for connection. Silence sharpens awareness. It allows you to see the relationship clearly, without emotional fog, and clarity is the foundation of true power. Importantly, this silence is not passive, it is not waiting by the phone, it is active self-anchoring. You fill your life with purpose, movement, growth, and meaning. You redirect energy back into your body, your goals, your spiritual alignment. This creates a subtle but profound shift in your presence. You become less reactive and more embodied. And embodied people are felt even in their absence. When the power dynamic shifts this way, the avoidant begins to sense that something has changed. Not because you said anything, but because the emotional gravity has moved. You are no longer orbiting them. You have returned to your own center. And when someone who once chased suddenly stands still, it forces the other person to move or to face the truth that they never intended to. Silence, then, becomes the mirror. It reflects back to the avoidant their own level of investment, their own emotional capacity, their own desire or lack of it. And regardless of what they choose, you remain grounded in your power, no longer negotiating your worth through words. Avoidant individuals are not driven by a lack of emotion. They are driven by a deep need for psychological and emotional safety. Their nervous systems are wired to associate closeness with danger, expectation, or loss of autonomy. For them, pressure does not feel like love, it feels like threat. This is why the more someone pushes for connection, clarity, or reassurance, the more the avoidant instinctively retreats. Silence, when rooted in self-respect rather than manipulation, creates the very condition in which they feel safest. Safety for an avoidant does not come from intensity or emotional urgency. It comes from space. Space allows them to breathe, to regulate, to feel without being observed or evaluated. When there is constant communication, emotional processing, or demands for closeness, their internal alarm system activates. They may not consciously recognize it as fear, but their body does. Silence lowers that alarm. It tells their nervous system that there is no immediate demand, no expectation to perform emotionally, no pressure to give more than they are ready to give. This absence of pressure allows something unexpected to happen. Their authentic emotions have room to surface. When they are not being pulled towards someone, they can finally notice the pull within themselves. Avoidants often stay disconnected from their own emotional experience because staying busy with distance feels safer than confronting longing. Silence removes the external stimulus and leaves them alone with their internal state. In that stillness, they may begin to feel the quiet ache of missing, the subtle curiosity of absence, or the emerging awareness of attachment. Silence also dismantles the avoidant's unconscious narrative that love equals loss of freedom. When you stop reaching, you are no longer asking them to give up their independence. You are demonstrating that connection does not require sacrifice of self. This is profoundly regulating for someone who fears enmeshment. Your silence communicates without explanation, you are free, and I am whole. That paradox is what allows love to feel safe rather than suffocating. Another crucial element is that silence removes the need for them to defend themselves. When someone is being pursued, even gently, they often feel the need to justify their distance. They may rationalize, minimize, or emotionally shut down to maintain control. Silence dissolves that defensive posture. There is nothing to push against, no argument to win, no expectation to manage. And in that absence of conflict, their authentic desire can emerge without resistance. Avoidants are also highly sensitive to emotional imbalance. When one person wants more and the other wants less, the one wanting less feels trapped. Silence restores balance by removing the visible demand. You are no longer signaling, I need this from you. You are signaling, I am okay within myself. This neutrality creates emotional safety. It tells them that connection is an option, not an obligation. Importantly, silence gives them the dignity of choice. Avoidants fall in love when they fail. They are choosing connection rather than being pulled into it. When they reach out after silence, it is not to escape pressure, it is to move toward desire. That distinction changes everything. Love that is chosen freely feels empowering, not threatening. Silence also interrupts old attachment scripts. Many avoidants learned early in life that closeness came with expectations they could not meet. By stepping back, you are offering a new relational experience, one where intimacy does not demand self-erasure. This repatterning happens not through discussion, but through experience. Silence becomes the teacher. When silence makes an avoidant feel safe, it is because it honors their pace without abandoning your own worth. It respects their boundaries while reinforcing your own. And in that mutual respect, something rare occurs. Love no longer feels like a demand, it feels like an invitation. When silence enters a dynamic that was once filled with constant communication, it disrupts the mental autopilot. The human mind is wired to notice patterns, and avoidant individuals rely heavily on predictability to stay emotionally distant. When they know when you will text, how you will respond, and how much emotional availability you will offer, they can remain disengaged without consequence. Silence breaks that pattern, and when the pattern breaks, the mind wakes up. Curiosity is born in the absence of certainty. When you go quiet, the avoidance mind begins to search for meaning, not because they suddenly become anxious in the same way an anxious partner might, but because the familiar structure that allowed emotional detachment has been removed. They begin to wonder what changed, what you are feeling, and whether your emotional orientation has shifted. That curiosity is not superficial. It is the first crack in emotional disengagement. Silence also creates space for reflection, something avoidants rarely allow themselves. As long as there is constant interaction, they can stay externally focused and internally disconnected. Communication gives them something to respond to rather than something to feel. When that communication stops, there is nowhere to redirect their attention. Reflection becomes unavoidable. In that quiet, their mind begins to replay moments, revisit conversations, and reassess emotional significance. They may start to recognize things they dismissed before: your consistency, your presence, your emotional availability. This reflective process often brings awareness of emotional loss. Avoidants tend to suppress attachment feelings until absence forces them into consciousness. Silence acts as that trigger. It highlights the emotional contrast between presence and absence. What once felt neutral suddenly feels empty. What once felt optional now feels missing. This is not manipulation. It is natural human psychology. Value is often recognized not in possession, but in loss. Silence also allows emotions to arise organically rather than reactively. When someone is actively engaging, emotions are often filtered through defense mechanisms. Avoidants may intellectualize, minimize, or detach to maintain control. But in silence, there is no immediate threat to autonomy. Without pressure, defenses soften. Emotions surface quietly, without confrontation. They may not label it as love or longing at first, but they feel a subtle emotional pull they can no longer ignore. Another powerful effect of silence is that it shifts attention inward. Instead of focusing on managing the relationship, the avoidant begins to observe their internal state. They may notice discomfort, restlessness, or an unexpected desire to reach out. These sensations are unfamiliar to someone who has trained themselves to disconnect. Awareness of emotion is the gateway to emotional intimacy, and silence opens that gate. Silence also strips away the external validation that allowed them to feel secure without investing. When reassurance is no longer offered freely, they must confront the reality of mutuality. Relationships require participation to exist. In silence, they realize that connection is not guaranteed, it is sustained. This realization invites a deeper evaluation of their own emotional contribution. Importantly, silence gives time for meaning to mature. Emotions need space to deepen. Constant interaction can keep things surface level, reactive, and habitual. Silence allows feelings to marinate, to grow roots rather than sparks. For avoidance, this slow burn process feels safer and more authentic than sudden emotional intensity. As curiosity deepens into reflection and reflection into awareness, something fundamental shifts. They are no longer avoiding emotion. They are encountering it. Not because they were pushed, persuaded, or convinced, but because silence gave their inner world room to speak. And once that inner dialogue begins, emotional connection is no longer something they are running from. It is something they are discovering within themselves. Detachment is often misunderstood as coldness or indifference, but true detachment is neither. It is not withdrawal as punishment, nor distance as manipulation. Detachment is the grounded decision to stop over-identifying with an outcome and to anchor yourself in self-respect. When detachment is rooted in clarity rather than resentment, it becomes one of the most powerful expressions of emotional maturity. It communicates that you value connection, but not at the cost of your dignity. Rejection says you are not enough. Detachment says I am enough. That distinction changes everything. When you detach, you are not pushing someone away, you are stepping back into yourself. You are no longer trying to convince, prove, or perform in order to be chosen. Instead, you are allowing space for mutual desire to reveal itself. This creates a radically different emotional tone, one that feels calm, stable, and self-contained. Avoidant individuals are highly attuned to emotional dependency. Even subtle signs of overinvestment can trigger their instinct to withdraw. Detachment neutralizes that trigger. When they sense that your emotional well-being is no longer contingent on their behavior, their nervous system relaxes. There is no longer an unspoken responsibility to meet your needs or manage your feelings. This absence of pressure allows connection to feel lighter and more voluntary. Detachment also restores authenticity. When you are attached to a specific outcome, your behavior subtly shifts. You may suppress your truth, tolerate misalignment, or abandon your boundaries to preserve connection. Detachment removes the incentive to self-betray. You begin to act in accordance with your values rather than your fears. This authenticity is deeply attractive, not because it seeks approval, but because it reflects inner congruence. There is also a profound energetic shift that occurs when detachment replaces emotional chasing. You stop leaking energy through overthinking, overanalyzing, and overgiving. That energy returns to you. You become more present in your body, more focused in your life, and more aligned with your purpose. This grounded presence is felt even in silence. It communicates stability, confidence, and emotional independence without a single word. Detachment invites reciprocity. When you stop doing more than your share, the imbalance becomes visible. The other person is no longer carried by your effort. They must et. Or step forward or accept the distance. This is not an ultimatum. It is a natural consequence. Detachment allows truth to surface. It reveals whether the connection was sustained by mutual desire or by your willingness to overextend. Importantly, detachment does not close the heart. It protects it. You remain open but not porous. You remain available but not desperate. You allow feelings to exist without letting them dictate your behavior. This emotional regulation creates safety not only for you but also for the avoidant. They can approach at their own pace, knowing they are not walking into emotional obligation. Detachment also teaches self-trust. When you stop clinging to external validation, you begin to trust your inner compass. You recognize that you can tolerate uncertainty, loss, and space without collapsing. This self-trust is empowering. It shifts your identity from someone seeking love to someone capable of giving and receiving it from a place of wholeness. When detachment is embodied as self-respect, it sends a clear, unspoken message. Connection is welcome, but self-abandonment is not. That message is not threatening, it is stabilizing. It sets the foundation for a dynamic where love is chosen freely, not negotiated through fear. Emotional absence has a way of revealing truths that constant presence can easily conceal. When someone is always available, always responsive, and always emotionally open, their value can become normalized, not diminished, but taken for granted. The human nervous system adapts quickly to consistency. What is familiar fades into the background. Emotional absence interrupts that familiarity and brings contrast back into focus. And it is within contrast that longing is born. Longing does not emerge from force or persuasion. It emerges from space. When emotional presence is removed, the mind begins to register what is no longer air. The quiet becomes noticeable. The absence creates an internal echo where emotion can finally resonate. For avoidant individuals, this is especially significant. They are skilled at suppressing desire when connection is readily available. Distance gives desire permission to surface without the threat of immediacy. Emotional absence allows memory to take over where habit once ruled. Instead of reacting to current interaction, the avoidant begins to recall past experiences, shared moments, emotional safety, laughter, depth. Memory softens defenses. It is easier to feel when there is no demand to act on those feelings. Longing often arises not in the present moment, but in reflection. Absence invites reflection, and reflection awakens emotion. There's also a biological element at play. When emotional stimulation is constant, the nervous system remains regulated through predictability. When that stimulation disappears, the system seeks to restore balance. This seeking can manifest as restlessness, curiosity, or a subtle pull toward reconnection. Emotional absence creates a vacuum, and the psyche naturally wants to fill it. Longing is the emotional expression of that pull. For avoidance, longing feels safer at a distance. When someone is not present, desire can be experienced internally without the pressure to respond, commit, or engage. They can miss someone without feeling trapped by that feeling. This is why emotional absence can paradoxically deepen attachment. It separates feeling from obligation. The heart can move without the mind needing to protect. Emotional absence also restores polarity. Desire thrives in polarity, the dynamic tension between closeness and distance. When one person is always leaning in, polarity collapses. The energy becomes static. By stepping back emotionally, you restore that dynamic tension. The avoidant is no longer reacting to your praise. Hence, they are responding to your absence. And response is where choice lives. Importantly, emotional absence does not mean emotional unavailability forever. It means allowing space for desire to regenerate. Like a muscle that grows in rest, emotional attraction strengthens when given time to recover. Constant emotional engagement can exhaust the system. Absence allows renewal. It gives the avoidant time to reapproach from genuine interest rather than emotional fatigue. Emotional absence also shifts the narrative from reassurance to mystery. When you are no longer explaining your feelings or offering emotional clarity, curiosity replaces certainty. The unknown invites imagination, and imagination is fertile ground for longing. The avoidant begins to wonder what you are feeling, what you are doing, and whether they still matter to you. That wondering is not manipulation. It is the natural result of space. At its core, emotional absence honors the rhythm of desire. It recognizes that love cannot be sustained by constant availability alone. It needs space to breathe, to stretch, to miss. When absence is held with self-respect and purpose, it does not create fear. It creates depth, and in that depth, longing has room to grow. Avoidant individuals do not experience love as something that can be demanded, negotiated, or accelerated. Their emotional system is built around autonomy, and anything that threatens that autonomy triggers withdrawal. This is why love does not take root when they are pushed toward it. It takes root when they arrive there on their own. Choice is the gateway through which an avoidant can safely enter emotional connection. When someone is pressured, whether through expectations, repeated conversations, emotional appeals, or silent resentment, the avoidant feels cornered. Even if the pressure is subtle, it registers as an attempt to control their emotional pace. In those moments, love becomes associated with obligation rather than desire. And obligation is the fastest way to extinguish genuine affection for someone who equates closeness with loss of freedom. When silence or emotional space is introduced, the dynamic changes fundamentally. There is no longer a force pulling them forward. The path toward connection is open, but not demanded. This freedom is regulating. It allows them to explore their feelings without the fear that acknowledging those feelings will immediately lead to expectations they cannot meet. They can feel without committing. They can desire without surrendering control. Choice also restores dignity on both sides. You are no longer waiting, hoping, or strategizing to be chosen. You are allowing the relationship to exist only if it is mutually desired. This removes the unequal emotional hierarchy that often forms when one person wants more. The avoidant is no longer positioned as the gatekeeper of intimacy. They are simply a participant with agency. Avoidants often need time to reconcile internal contradictions. They may crave connection while simultaneously fearing it. When forced to confront that conflict too quickly, they default to avoidance. But when given space, they can slowly integrate these opposing needs. Choice allows that integration to happen at their own pace. Love in this context is not a reaction, it is a realization. Another important aspect of choice is ownership. When an avoidant chooses connection, they are more likely to invest in it. What is freely chosen is more deeply valued. What is coerced is often resented. Silence and space invite them to take ownership of their feelings rather than responding to someone else's needs. This ownership is what transforms fleeting interest into emotional commitment. Choice also changes the internal narrative. Instead of thinking, I have to respond or I have to show up, the avoidant begins to think, I want to reach out or I miss them. This shift from obligation to desire is subtle but profound. It marks the difference between compliance and love cannot exist where there is no sense of agency. Importantly, allowing choice does not mean tolerating emotional neglect indefinitely. It means recognizing that love cannot be built on pressure without sacrificing authenticity. By stepping back, you are not abandoning your needs, you are honoring them by refusing to force connection where it is not freely given. This clarity creates emotional integrity. When avoidants are allowed to choose, they experience a rare sense of safety in intimacy. They are not being pulled or pushed. They are moving toward something because it feels right. And when they do, their love is often deeper and more intentional because it was not extracted, it was discovered. Love that is chosen carries a different energy. It is not defensive or hesitant. It is grounded in desire and self-trust. And for an avoidant, that kind of love is the only kind that can truly last. Inner wholeness is not something you perform for another person. It is something you cultivate within yourself. It is the state of being emotionally complete, self-directed, and grounded in your own sense of worth. When someone operates from inner wholeness, they are not seeking another person to fill a void or regulate their emotions. This internal stability creates a powerful form of attraction because it carries no neediness, no urgency, and no hidden demand. It simply exists, and that existence is felt. For avoidant individuals, neediness is one of the strongest repellents, not because they lack compassion, but because they associate emotional dependence with loss of autonomy. When someone's happiness appears tied to their availability or behavior, it triggers a sense of responsibility they did not consent to. Inner wholeness removes that burden. It tells the avoidant, without words, I am responsible for myself. That message is deeply soothing to a nervous system that fears entanglement. Wholeness also shifts how connection is offered. Instead of seeking validation, you offer presence. Instead of asking to be chosen, you invite mutuality. This changes the energetic quality of interaction. There is no subtle grasping, no over-explaining, no emotional bargaining. Your words and actions come from fullness rather than lack, and fullness is inherently attractive because it does not take, it shares. Another powerful aspect of inner wholeness is emotional regulation. When you are grounded within yourself, you are less reactive to distance, silence, or ambiguity. You do not interpret space as rejection or immediacy as validation. This emotional steadiness creates safety. Avoidants are drawn to people who can tolerate space without panic and closeness without control. Inner wholeness allows you to do both. Wholeness also enhances polarity. Attraction thrives when there is a clear sense of self on both sides. When you are anchored in your own identity, values, and purpose, you create a dynamic where connection becomes an exchange between two complete individuals rather than a fusion. This preserves autonomy while allowing intimacy. For avoidance, this balance is essential. They can approach without fearing they will be consumed. Inner wholeness also means your life is rich beyond the relationship. You are engaged in growth, purpose, creativity, and meaning. Your world does not shrink around another person. This expansiveness is magnetic. It communicates that being with you adds to life, rather than becoming its sole focus. Avoidance often feels safest when love feels additive, not consuming. Importantly, wholeness sharpens discernment. You no longer chase potential or tolerate inconsistency in the hope of being chosen. You evaluate connection based on alignment, not attachment. The self-respect subtly shifts the dynamic. You are no longer proving your worth, you are expressing it. And that expression sets a standard without a single demand. Wholeness also changes how absence is experienced. Silence no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like neutrality. You are comfortable in your own company. This comfort sends a powerful signal. Connection is welcome but not required for your emotional survival. That signal is rare and deeply compelling. When an avoidant encounters someone who is whole, they sense freedom rather than expectation. They feel invited, not obligated. And in that freedom, love has space to grow naturally. Not because you needed them, but because you did not. Love reaches its deepest expression not through urgency, but through alignment. When silence is guided by purpose rather than fear, it becomes a sacred pause instead of an emotional reaction. Fear-driven silence carries resentment, manipulation, or the hope of control. Purpose-driven silence carries clarity, intention, and trust in a higher order of timing. The difference is subtle in behavior but profound in energy, and energy is what truly shapes connection. When silence comes from fear, it is filled with inner noise. The mind races, stories multiply, and the heart waits tensely for a response. This kind of silence is not grounded, it is performative. It is meant to provoke a reaction. Purposeful silence, on the other hand, is calm. It is spacious. It arises from the decision to step back and realign with truth, rather than react to discomfort. This silence is not trying to get something. It is allowing something to be revealed. Purpose-driven silence honors divine order. It recognizes that not everything unfolds through FFO. Some things unfold through surrender. When you stop interfering with constant communication, reassurance, and emotional management, you allow the relationship to show you what it truly is. Silence becomes a form of listening, not to the other person, but to life itself. It asks, what is meant to arise here when I stop forcing? This kind of silence also restores integrity. Instead of continuing to engage in dynamics that feel misaligned or draining, you choose to pause. That pause is not abandonment. It is honesty. You are no longer saying yes with your mouth while your spirit says no. You are allowing your actions to match your inner knowing. Integrity is attractive because it carries authority. It signals that you trust yourself and the path unfolding before you. Purposeful silence creates space for truth to emerge on both sides. The avoidant is free to approach or retreat without resistance. You are free to observe without attachment. This mutual freedom removes distortion. There is no performance, no overfunctioning, no emotional chasing. What remains is authenticity. And authenticity is the only ground where real love can stand. There is also a spiritual dimension to this silence. When you step back from control, you create room for something greater than ego to operate. Whether one calls it intuition, divine timing, or inner wisdom, purposeful silence invites guidance beyond fear. It allows answers to arrive organically, rather than being demanded prematurely. Often clarity comes not through conversation, but through stillness. Purpose-driven silence also builds faith in yourself and in life. You learn that you can pause without collapsing, wait without losing yourself, and trust without guarantees. This faith changes how you relate to love. You stop grasping for outcomes and start living in alignment with your values. Love becomes something you welcome, not something you chase. Importantly, this silence does not close the door. It leaves it open without standing in the doorway. It says, what is meant for me will meet me in truth. That posture is powerful. It removes desperation and replaces it with calm expectancy. And calm expectancy is deeply grounding for someone who fears emotional intensity. When silence is guided by purpose, it becomes an act of devotion to truth, to alignment, to self-respect. It allows love to reveal its real shape, and whatever emerges from that space, connection or closure, arrives with clarity, dignity, and peace. Thank you for giving your time, attention, and openness to this message. May it serve you with clarity and strength. Goodbye for now, and remember, when you honor yourself, love always finds its way in truth.